Wow. Hi, everyone. Well, this is going to be a very different conversation. That's a non-astrological conversation, but I think it's going to be a delightful one. And I'm going to welcome Mary Berkery to the channel. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you, Pam.
Now, Mary is an exceptional individual. She does beautiful work with equine-assisted learning, and we're going to be diving into the world of horses and their hearts and their healing ability. And Mary's always lived close to the threshold where the human world meets the wisdom of horses. I loved that sentence. Also, nature and the unseen intelligence that moves through all living things. And this is very shamanic. So she's an equine assisted learning facilitator, a soul coach, a retreat leader, an international speaker, an author of wonderful book, Saved by a Horse. She's given a brilliant TED talk called Horses as Mirrors. So we're going to dive into our relationship with the animal world, in particular horses here with Mary, because that's the principal animal she works with. And first of all, Mary, can you explain to us what you mean by equine assisted learning practitioner? What do you actually mean by that, and what do you do in your work with horses that helps the horses but also helps the humans who are linked with them?
Okay, Pam, it's lovely to be here. I'll start with imagine you're at a crossroads or you have an issue in your life and you decide to go to a coach or therapist or a counselor or a career guidance coach. But instead of going to them in their rooms, in their consulting rooms or a consultant, you are brought to a barn or a field or an arena, and we work that issue out or those issues out in the presence of horses. So that's it. And it started for me when I was living in Colorado, where I heard of two psychotherapists who'd literally brought their practice into an arena. And
Yeah.
I thought, this is mad. This is crazy. Because I grew up with horses and I was caught in the old matrix, as we call it, of, horses, something to be, is an animal, is a dumb animal, in that sense.
Oh no.
So
Oh no.
out of sheer curiosity, I went, and it just was pivotal in my life, pivotal experience in my life. So,
So could you
so
give us
that
a really big example of how it's changed either your life or someone else's life that you've worked with?
okay, I will. I'll give an example of the story I told you when I spoke to you the last time, Pam. But I just want to go back a little bit on what do horses do before I go to that. Is that okay?
Yeah, fine.
Yeah, so because horses in the wild are wired to they're prey animals, so they're wired to read whether a coyote or a wolf or a human, sorry to say, is coming in to either kill them, trap them, or whatever. So they're genetically wired because they're attacked, or a mountain lion. So they are wired that when you come into their presence, they can actually hear your heartbeat from 4 feet away. They can feel what sometimes you're not even conscious of. And so you can rock up, in your designer gear or your bicycle or your posh car or your rags, but they don't look at you on that level. They get you on a resonance level. How are the frequencies running in your world? And they pick that up, and they either, will reflect that back to you, or they will move away from you, or they'll get closer to you if they sense that you're in coherence and you're authentic.
Beautiful.
So that's how it works. So when you go into an arena, I mean, I have done a serious amount of personal development myself, but I can truly say that horses are way beyond me when it comes to the wisdom that they hold and what they can reflect back to a human. So that's sort of equine assisted learning in a kind of a nutshell. And then just on the third element of that, before I tell the story, is that it's scientifically shown now that just by being in their presence, their their heart energy is about 7 times larger than ours. And in fact, our heart energy is 100 times larger than our brain energy. And this is where we need to be living from our heart. So just by being in their, in a sense, frequency field, it is scientifically shown that blood pressure can drop, that heart rate can regulate, and that very much so anxiety and worry can fall away because we come into this frequency that's very grounded and very on the earth. They literally, as I said, the last one was talking to you, they've literally four suckers on the ground, you know. So they pull us out of this busy mind and into our own hearts and into our own heart coherence and into where we find that calm just by nothing to do with any practices that we do as equine assisted learning facilitators, just by standing within 3 feet of a horse.
Because they've got massive heart toroidal fields
Yes,
that are
massive,
very healing.
massive,
Yeah,
massive.
I'm aware of
Yeah,
that.
and I used to run a business in Dublin at one point, and I still stayed in touch with horses, and I 15 people working for me, and I can still remember driving out to, having conversations in my head. Why did she say that to the customer? Da, 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 And I go, and I'd just muck out a stable. I wouldn't even ride. I now drive home and say, gosh, I'm not thinking in the way I used to. Now, I knew nothing at the time about equine assisted learning, but I had experienced how I'd come out of this busyness and had come down into my own embodied awareness and so where there's no story spinning or no conversation running. Okay. So that's it. So I can tell you a story if you'd like me to
Yeah,
now.
that would be beautiful as an example.
Okay.
Beautiful.
I have so many. We could be here for 2 hours. So let me just think of um okay, I'll tell you one from I was invited to the Caribbean to be with a man who has 25 horses. Okay. And it was part holiday, part work. And he ran called Equus Rides, taking people for rides along the beach in the Caribbean. And just before I left, one of the workers asked for an equine assisted learning session. And while I was there, I, of course, had to check all the horses out because I'm a horse girl. And there was one horse that I was quite drawn to. His name was Lancelot, big black horse. But he was what we call in the horse world head shy. And he wouldn't let me touch his head. But when I eventually got to touch his head with my finger, his nose was covered in ridges. Okay. And I said to Paul, who ran the place, I said, what's up with Lancelot? He's got all these bumps and he said, well, it's practice in the Caribbean when they race on the beach that they cover the horse's head with a sack. They beat it
Well,
with a stick, and then they pull the sack off, and the horse runs as if the devil is after him, basically pumping with adrenaline. And this happened to Lancelot. He said even to the point that he won't even go on the beach now. He won't allow anyone ride him on the beach. He gets so nervous. So so that was a story. So, oh my gosh, how horrific that is. So anyway, this woman asked for a session, and her issue was that there was a recurring pattern in her life where she would get very friendly with people, be very giving, very nice, do everything for them. And professionally, the same thing would happen. She'd be the gopher girl. And then in both situations, she started to feel resentful because it wasn't coming back. It wasn't kind of a two-way traffic. I suppose the word we'd have for it now is codependent behavior. So, and what she would do was she'd either withdraw from the friendship or leave the job. And it was recurring to the point that she just needed to look at it. And she was aware enough to know that it was repeating itself. So we chose a horse. She chose a horse to work with, which was Lancelot. So one of my exercises, you do not touch the horse. When you go into the horse's arena, you wait for the horse to make contact with you first. So we did a body scan, we do some exercises to stay grounded. If you start feeling resentful, if you start playing out the story in the arena, what do you do? And rather than withdrawing from the horse, what happens? So we prepared. She went in, She walked over to the feeding trough, and Lancelot just stood there, just shooting the breeze, looking around, didn't even pay attention to her. She walked over to the scratching tree. Lancelot just, didn't pay any attention to her. Then she went into the center of the arena and sat down in a lotus position. Now, even in my training, this is not allowed. But I have what I now call horse instinct. I just felt, leave it alone, just wait, just take a breath. Next thing, what did Lancelot do? Only come over and lie down beside her and put his head in her lap. Now, I had never seen a horse before lie down beside somebody. It was new for me. Yeah, I've seen it a lot of times since. But in this case, he put his head in her lap, and there she started to slowly stroke his head, and he left his head in her lap. And I'm there like, oh my God, it was like the tears just pouring down my face. Okay. And there's a kind of a longer version to that story, but I won't go into it. There's a part two where she came out and she went back in again and she sat down again and the very same thing happened again. But I won't go into that. I'll just get into the learning because of time. So when she came out, I just said, well, what were you doing? What did it mean when you went to the scratching tree and the feeding trough? And she just started to laugh. She said, that's what I do with people. You know, I thought Lancelot would think I had food, or I thought he would think I would scratch him. But horses get you. And I'm not interested in your false self, basically. That's the message. This is the game you play to get attention. I have no interest in this. And she saw
Wow.
it so clearly. She saw so clearly that he was not playing the game with her.
So that was a
And
real breakthrough for her, Mary.
that was a realization that this behavior isn't healthy. This giving, giving, giving. And if I'll steal that line, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. I said, yeah. So it's like he was not in. And I said, what were you thinking when you sat into the middle of the arena? And oh, I feel tears. She said, I chose to be vulnerable. I chose to let go of efforting, sit down to be vulnerable, and just be with my heart.
And did it help to heal Lancelot?
Well, yeah, well, this is the other thing that happened. I mean, and I just said, then what would that look like if, you know, you're in a situation where you're resentful? What would vulnerability look like? What would be absolutely honest and raw look like? Here you are being vulnerable with a horse, and the horse then shares he's vulnerable, the most vulnerable part of his body back with you. And I ended up saying, some people might walk away, but you'll actually get real connection with the ones that don't. So, but then the following day, Pam, to answer your question, she was riding Lancelot on the beach. She was riding Lancelot on one of the rides. And when they got to the beach, she did what she normally did, which was to get off and lead him because he shook like a little kitten on the beach. This time, because they use felt saddles in the Caribbean, not the traditional saddles, this time he lay down the sand and rolled. So there was something about that there's this connection between animals, and I'm seeing it with other animals as well. But this when we connect with them in a real way, they connect back with us in a real way, but we all sort of come up the Richter scale of healing together. We can awaken a horse to his true potential or her true potential, but they can help us to become aware of our unconscious behaviors.
That's
So that
beautiful.
was just one, and the third part of that story is the owner, Paul, came to Ireland, came to visit me in the West. I live in Ireland, came to visit me in the west of Ireland. He said, of all my horses, because I wouldn't share what happened, to him, because that's client privilege. And this woman has given me permission to share the story publicly since. But of all my horses to do this, Lancelot, I can't believe. I want to learn, how did you make the horse do this? I was like, I didn't learn anything. I didn't teach the horse anything. This is horse wisdom. There are 55 million years on the planet. We're only here a couple of 100,000 years. Originally, they were sacred keepers. They were threshold. They carried people from one reality to the next. They have that in them. And and I started teaching him some simple boundary exercises with horses and not touching the horse until the horse touches you. He couldn't cope because he was so filled up with the old way of approaching an animal. And after coming all the way to see me, he just wanted to learn circus tricks that I didn't have. So that's just one very powerful example with a horse. In my book, Saved by a Horse, it's a very simple book with very simple stories, but there's a number of stories there in that book, and that story is in that book. Yeah.
So the connection happens via authenticity, being your absolute true sense,
Mhm.
and the better your match of heart coherence with the horse, the better that contact will be, that healing will be, because it brings
Well,
coherence for your heart as well.
yeah,
Being
well, what it does is it shows up what you need to look at.
right,
So if you walk in with something unconscious and you want to see what that is, the horse in all the cases I've come across will reflect that back,
wow. And
so
I love the fact, Mary, you talk about the horses as threshold guides because
oh
we are in a period of huge transformation and transition. We're in threshold times.
mm,
So, what can horses teach us about this or lead us into? Because, we're right in the crucible of change right now. How are
yeah.
horses, with their wisdom, leading us and instructing us?
Well, I think I will say here in this case horses and all animals
Right.
actually, because what has happened, I'm writing a third book and I had finished the book when I was shown there's another chapter, and it was called Reconnection to the Sacred. And then I started to research on that, and I literally have sat in my room just crying my eyes out, because if you look at the Buddhist tradition, it was Kantata that took Siddhartha out of the castle to the edge of the forest and let him there where he became Buddha. In the Muhammad was led by a horse burrock through the hell and heaven. Even in Ireland, in the heart chakra point of Ireland, which is Uisneach, Uisneach, Dagda, who was the father of the Tuatha De Danann, which were the people of light, who are now the little people of Ireland, who are gone into the drumlins and the hills. They found a subterrane of two, they're called solar horses, a mare following a stallion following a mare, and they're decked out in the full regalia of a high king or high chieftain, and they were said to be carriers of light.
Wow. So there was a
You
real
know, so
reverence.
we had all that. These were and we all. I mean, people watching this could be listening to this in the middle of an apartment in a city, but so many people have this connection with horse, with the mystical, beautiful quality of horse, and even dream of them. And even in Jungian therapy, it means something if you dream of a horse. So we have this kind of ancient connection. And of course, we're only 2 generations away from how they carried our food and our milk and plowed our fields and went down our mines. We were so dependent. Even our cars are connected to horsepower. So we have this very so but prior to when they became beasts of burden, they were sacred beings, carriers of light, bringing even in the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, you have the four horses of the apocalypse, one bringing revolution, the other bringing famine, the other bringing death, and we're in the year of the horse. So this energy. So if you look at any of the traditions, they brought the founders, Muhammad, in the Greek tradition, Pegasus, from one reality to the next. How I'm bringing that into today's language is we have been so conditioned, Pam, in our educational system and also in our religious system. We're so disempowered, and we've made the rational mind God. You have to think about, whereas when you come into the field of an animal, and in this case a horse, who doesn't think in that rational way. It feels with its heart, and its body holds the intelligence. it helps us to come out of that little box up here and down into that world below our chin, where there's no story spinning, where we're making 3 million red blood cells a second. We're already awesome. I don't, what's that a minute? I can't even figure it out. So, and we don't even know what makes our heart beat. And we worry about, food tomorrow. And we don't even, so much is happening by this incredible cosmic intelligence that's working through us. Horses live that all the time. They live in that state of knowing, or they're not thinking about tomorrow. When they feel something, they let it move through them. They hold no story. They release, they forgive, and as we say, they go back to grazing. We kind of feel it, and then the mind comes in, puts a lid on it, and says, "You shouldn't be thinking like that. You're a nice person. You shouldn't be thinking these murderous thoughts or whatever." We're not allowed. So they all go under, and we've lids of lids of lids. So our real beautiful and we've collected so much conditioned responses and ancestral responses and gender responses, what it means to be Irish, what it means to be English, what it means to be female, male. And I think when we go into an arena with, in my case, a horse, maybe somebody else, other people working with dolphins, or I think deer could be amazing too, because they're also prey animals. But um, you go into an arena, they bring you into another way of being. And I see in so many cases, in the presence of a horse, people start feeling. They start feeling. I have one gorgeous young girl came to me. She just came out of curiosity because her sister had such a breakthrough dealing with panic attacks in the presence of horses. She decided she'd come. And she came all smiley whilies, gorgeous, very polite, very nice. She walks into her, she's 12, going on 13, goes into the arena and starts sobbing, crying. And what had happened was she finished, we call it high school in here in Ireland, we call it national school. She'd finished her high school in the middle of the COVID lockdown. There was no opportunity to say goodbye to her fellow students or her teachers. She was she didn't know, but she was feeling totally despondent and depressed and not looking forward to secondary school. Um, and felt really sad. She was so happy in her high school, in her sorry, primary school years. And she was just feeling, and she hadn't felt it. She hadn't allowed herself to feel it. But just by being in this energy that brings her down, she could feel she's really sad. I never say goodbye. And so I checked at the end, this is where my coaching skills come in. I said, have you shared this with anyone else? No, she didn't even know she was feeling it, only that she was feeling kind of numb, you know. And so she decided to call a friend. The friend was feeling the same, of course. Sometimes what we think is only our personal thing, and we have the courage to be open and they ended up deciding to create a ritual in the woods, in a circle, social distance. All got T-shirts made, got a gift for their teachers, and she sailed into her high school years smiling.
That's
You
beautiful.
know,
So
so,
horses really do act as mirrors to what
mm,
we are truly feeling, even if we don't know that ourselves and haven't been able to
mm,
get in touch with
mm,
us with it. They
mm,
reflect back the
mm,
state of our heart and improve
mm,
our heart coherence. But the reason I think this conversation is so relevant for now
mm,
is we are moving into a phase of consciousness where we're going to
mm,
remember our
mm,
connection to the ancient, the animal world, the
mm.
elemental world, that every living thing has consciousness. Every tree,
And
every
yeah,
bird, every crystal, every rock, every piece of moss, every slug,
absolutely,
it all
absolutely.
has consciousness in different
We
forms.
are all fractals of this field of consciousness.
Exactly.
And one of the exercises, there's a gift for anyone who wants to. It's called reflective practices, but one is called beginner's mind.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And it's like walk into a field, whether there's chickens or hens or trees or flowers or dogs or cats, or just take away the name you put on it and just see it as a part of this incredible expression of life, of consciousness. And of course, I think it's Chiron has just moved into Taurus, and
Right.
so it's like that real coming down. And back to the threshold piece. I mean, I've had a spiritual experience in the presence of a horse. Um, and I've put it into a story actually in reflective practices where I decided to go into the field and have no agenda. This horse didn't like to be touched. And I just go into the horse's world and just be in the horse's world, not going in. I wanted to go in and just touch it. And when I went in, this horse is very clear with her boundaries. I just stood 3 feet away from her. And I had this embodied electric feeling running through my body, right down through my legs. And not only was I hearing with my ears, I was hearing with my skin. I was hearing the bird's song and the breeze. And in that exact moment, I said, oh my God, this is how horses live. And the very minute I thought that thought, she reached over and she just gave a little nip to my knuckle here. And normally I'd be afraid of something like that, but now I was in horse world. And I heard clearly, welcome to my world.
Beautiful.
And it was so awake, Pam. It was a vibrating, there was no such thing as time. It was timeless, but it was a vibrating, overflowing, transcendent now.
So horses in that way can take us into other
Yeah,
dimensions where
yeah,
we are in a pure state of being.
absolutely.
Wow.
I run now a couple of months since I've started to prepare this last chapter, Returning to the Sacred. I I I have decided that, and I'll share one other experience I had. It was a very short story. I decided to start bringing some of this work online so that you don't have to travel to the west of Ireland to see me. And I have been bowled over by what I found by just going in, using visualization, using pictures of horses or a horse you loved. And people have had cathartic experiences and breakthroughs. One is on my YouTube where she just said her life is totally changed after that 2 hours. And I had an experience here. I wasn't near my horse. I work with my own horses, but I also work in a livery yard. And without going into what happens in livery yards, a lot of horses suffer there. It's not it's part of an old. People believe they're doing well, but they're in little boxes and they're herd animals. It's one piece, and in the wild they eat 18 hours a day, but in a livery yard they kind of get breakfast and dinner, and they need food in their stomach all the time. So it's just they suffer. And but there was one horse there in this particular yard, they go trekking. They're ridden by different people all year round because I live in a tourist part of Ireland. And but this one horse hadn't sort of lost his spirit. Some of them numbed down. And I was here in my house one day, and I was ruminating over a situation where I had felt kind of wronged. And I was kind of cross about it, and I was having these conversations in my head, and and next thing, this horse that in the livery yard just kept coming into my mind, and he loves to play, and I just said, "Okay, Cody, what do you think?" And I just heard clearly, I haven't been treated right either. And immediately, Pam, I'm an hour's drive away from this livery yard. Immediately, it just, all my kind of conversations just fell away. Fell away just like that, like it turned a tap on. So that plus my last chapter, I said, I'm going to bring this online because when you think about something, you're there, and you're sharing that all the time with your beautiful work. So when we think about horse frequency, horse energy, ancient horse energy, we can tap into it. And of course, homeopathy, it's frequency medicine, and there's so much energy medicine out there. And so I'm going to continue doing that because it's available to all of us, whether we not near animals at all. Yeah.
It's very touching. And I know when we spoke earlier, you talked about the analogy of, horses being saddled and bridled and martingales and, all the equipment, but that's, such a metaphor really for where we are or where we have been as humanity, with all of this top-down control and dominance, and people talk about breaking a young horse to make it obedient. There's such strong parallel here, and so the need for freedom for the horse, and we're really feeling it deeply in the year of the fire horse. We really, really are. The need for freedom, just as horses have, is going to start to surge through humanity. I think particularly in the second half of this year as Jupiter moves into Leo. So there's they can teach us so much because they've suffered immensely, but also they're way ahead of us in terms of I think their level of consciousness.
Absolutely,
We
absolutely. And
are,
when we start, like all my work now is at liberty. I put no halters on, no saddle. And of course, equine assisted work in its essence is on the ground.
yeah,
Some people do equine assisted, they call it mindful riding. I don't do that. I don't ride anymore either. And I don't own a bridle or a saddle. I have halters because sometimes you need to box a horse to take it somewhere.
yeah,
But and I have found it's amazing because once you give them the choice, they're way more, rather than coming in with this unconscious arrogance, that I have to lead them here and tie them. But once you give them the choice, I have seen over and over again, as soon as the session is over, they will walk away. I don't have to be controlling and dominating in that way. And of course, what we do to another, we're doing to ourselves. So we have been harnessed, and saddled, and we hold ourselves in. And we've been boxed into little, in ice. So many people. I mean, I remember listening to Mother Teresa in Dublin many years ago, and she said the epidemic of loneliness is much worse than the epidemic in India. People living in their little stables on their own and not part of a community or a herd. So yeah, and also a horse on its own in a field isn't right either, and also I'm seeing, maybe it's my algorithms in my phone, but I'm seeing so many competitions now where it's bitless bridles, and it's just such a step in the right direction.
and I don't know if you're aware of Ben Atkinson's work.
Yeah, yeah,
It's always free, and it's just beautiful to
yeah.
watch. So
Well, he's just moving with the frequency. He's in the frequency field of horse.
exactly, it's spectacular.
And he's just moving with that frequency in the same way as birds fly
Yes,
together.
beautiful.
Or the starling murmurations.
Yeah,
They're tuned into the frequency, and we're starting to wake up to that. This is not a factory here. This is a field of frequency, this
yeah.
body,
Beautiful, beautiful. It's
So
interesting, Mary, on social media, I often see a lady, sadly, I don't know her name, but she's a healer in America and she has many
yeah,
horses that are free. And when people are very ill, they lie on a couch
yeah,
and it's in the
yeah,
open air, it's out in the woods somewhere.
yeah,
And the horses, just by choice, will come
yeah.
and rest their heads very, very gently on the patient, often where the area where there's an energy block.
Absolutely,
It's they
absolutely,
sort of go into a trance. They go into a
yeah,
healing trance to help that. But it's
absolutely.
just beautiful to watch, and it always brings me to tears. So, and can do other animals do this as well?
Well,
I mean, clearly you're
I'm laughing, but I'm going to share. Yes, I was about 3 years ago. I was introduced to a book called Kingship with All Life, and it was written in the 1950s. And I recommend you get it. It's a slim little book, John Boone, and it was the story of a man who was asked to mind a dog. Okay, and what he was saying in the book was exactly what I'm seeing with the horse. When he approached the dog with arrogance and with agenda, they clashed basically. And when he started coming into mutual respect, this is another sentient being over here that has intelligence that I have can't even fathom. They had a wonderful time. So it was transforming for him. He was minding this dog for 3 months. So then he went into